The longer this virus is around, the more it's going to change and
Right.
adapt and become vaccine resilient, is it not?
Well, vaccine resiliency, vaccine escape is a little bit more tricky. We don't think that this will escape the vaccine, but you are right that the longer this virus circulates in nature, that it has a host or reservoir of whether it's humans or animals to replicate, pass on, and in these hosts mutate. The longer that keeps happening, the more and more of these mutations, these chance unlucky mutations that we will see. And so this is why we have to really eradicate. Zero COVID should be the goal, because with zero COVID, we can eradicate it for good and return to complete normal. But with this semi, lockdown, semi, keep the embers as long as it's almost gone, that's half willy-nilly approach will not end this virus. It will allow it to become endemic for long term and mutate more and more forms. And we just cannot afford that.
Here in the United Kingdom, but also where you are in the United States, that does appear to be the approach, though. As long as the hospitals can deal with the inflow of patients, then you kind of release some of the restrictions, let businesses open again and movie theaters and salons. And then the moment it looks like they're about to be overwhelmed again, they start locking down. And that's what we're experiencing here in London. Because of this new development with the virus, they are locking down and starting to get pretty panicked, but they're never going for what you talk about, this kind of zero approach to the virus.
Yeah, my best analogy is, look, if you're owner of Jurassic Park and you know what, you've almost eliminated all the velociraptors. But welcome to the park, kids. Come to the park. No one's going to come to the park. And same with if it was a zoo, the full economic demand and marginal propensities to consume and all these things in economics, they will not return until you have completely eliminated this virus. This virus is just that pernicious, just that easy way to basically transmit, that it will really stall out our economic development in so many different ways and hurt our children in so many ways. So other than the vaccine strategy, which I cannot, emphasize is so important, but isn't coming fast enough given the pace of inoculations, zero COVID should be the goal. And really, to truly stamp it out so that it's never a menace to us again, you really have to aim for that. And with the hospital criteria, it's so dumb. Look, if that was the criteria for everything, you know what? You don't need to wear helmets. Our hospital beds are not full. You don't need, seatbelt laws. Our hospital beds are not full. That's not how public health works. You reduce risk every single way you can.
How concerned are you about this new variant that they've traced back to at least starting here in the United Kingdom, especially in the southeast and around London where I am, to September, they think. And it has, quote unquote, by the government, taken off. How concerned are you? Is this just another variant in some 4,000 variants, or would you say, no, this is a lot more significant?
Yeah, we've had a lot of variants, but this is significant given that the number of mutations is accumulated is huge. It's like a huge step up from the average rate of mutation. And it's in the spike protein and in the binding domains, which means it can likely modify how this virus functions. And this increased transmissibility, anywhere between 50 and 70%, is worrisome. That said, it doesn't change how our public health guidelines are. We know how to stop this virus. It's basically wear masks, take distance precautions, but that's not enough. Take airborne precautions, because this is the airborne virus, and hence ventilate, and do all these testing, contact tracing. All of these things don't change. These strategies still work.
Up until now, it's been gauged here and in other parts of the United States that it's more important to keep schools open than it is to keep kids away from COVID, because they don't generally get a lot of big reactions to it, or they're asymptomatic. But no doubt it is spreading amongst kids. And this new variant appears to be based on initial reports. And I understand studies are still going on, and you don't have firsthand studies in front of you right now. But what do you think? How do you interpret that data that you're starting to see about its ability to spread with kids? And what does that mean to school openings, which are just around the corner?
Right. And I think this is one of the factors that really worries me, because this transmissibility, people have downplayed it in children for the longest time. Now, granted, children don't die at a high rate, but they do get sick, do get hospitalized, and some, of course, unfortunately do die. But this is only more important for our kids, because if it is true, if it is preliminary data is true that this elevates the transmission risk among kids to the level of adults, which is what they're speculating, this means that children are efficient vectors as adults. And that means schools will become much more dangerous of a place. Now, obviously, of all the things to open, the last things to close down should be schools. And so I would rather close down bars and restaurants before I close schools. But this really changes the ballgame around schools. And this emphasizes that stopping the virus, ultimately stopping the virus through vaccinations or through these other public health containment measures, testing, contact tracing, masks, ventilation, airborne precautions, it just takes on a level of urgency I cannot emphasize enough. And people are just also ignoring the fact that it's airborne. It's wash your hands is important in the early days, but
Yeah.
I think wash your hands, it's still important, but not nearly as important to ventilate, and not nearly as important as using advanced MERV 13 filters, germicidal UV for office buildings and newer schools. All these things take on a new level of urgency, unfortunately. And if this variant holds out true, which is now detected in like dozens of countries worldwide, it is very worrisome for our kids going back to school.
Do you think it's
in spring and
much
fall.
more widespread than we realize? Because
Oh
the
yeah.
UK is very, very good at analyzing, like 100 times better at doing genome sequencing and studying the development of the virus. Do you think that there's just a lot of other countries that just haven't recognized how widespread this is already in their populations?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember the old adage, no testing, no cases, no pandemic. Well, in this situation, it's no genomic sequencing, no mutations, no new variants. It's this, and it's a very backwards, see no evil, hear no evil, but is there truly evil? We don't know. And US is ranked number 43 in the world in terms of percentage of total cases sequenced, virus cases sequenced. So we're really behind the ball game here. And we think it could already be behind. Remember, in the spring, we had discovered that we were 2 months behind the identification of the early Washington state cases, because we were lacking testing in January and February. So this is the worry, that it's already here, it's already circulating. Now, it's not more deadly or virulent than the previous strains, but again, what makes this virus so unique is that it doesn't kill everyone really quickly, because if you do, like Ebola with 50% mortality, this virus wouldn't take over the world. It spreads perniciously, kills a lot of people, but also harmlessly passes through many. So we have to stop it, and we have to take a hold no prisoner, zero COVID approach, because those countries that have, New Zealand, Taiwan, Australia, and also China and Vietnam, they've enjoyed hundreds of days of no community transmissions for the most part, and no deaths. And they're having concerts, sports games. Their life is basically returned to normal, and they have not paid any further price beyond the initial lockdown period. But we are constantly paying it again and again with multi-trillion-dollar relief bills that we can't afford in the long term. We have to do it, and we have to stop it now.
Editorial in the Garden by an Anthony Costello, who's a professor of global health and sustainable development at University College here in London, says, don't blame the new development with the virus for where we are. He says the Prime Minister's repeated dithering, delays, and seeming inability to make unpopular decisions have led Britain to one of the worst death rates in the world. We can only hope that we're not in that position by Easter. He says there's a lot of parallels between what's happened in Britain and what has happened under President Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. Most of the global cases, hospitalizations, and deaths are not due to the new variant. The new variant is still a small minority of the total viruses that's circulating. And, it really is a show of how big a difference good leadership makes. In New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, her leadership allowed huge move fast and take the precautionary principle. Taiwan did the same thing as well. Taiwan's vice president is actually a Johns Hopkins trained epidemiologist. They moved fast. They didn't blink when it came to how bad this could be.
What is the risk? And I don't want to over dramatize it, but it seems to me in everything that I've read that you've already talked about the new variant changing somewhat the development of the spike protein, which is what the vaccines are designed to cling onto and attack. If we dither, to use somebody else's words again, if this goes on with us just kind of letting the steam out of the lockdowns and then locking down a bit more and then letting it run again, run hot, isn't there a danger that these vaccines that we need so badly at a certain point will get outpaced by COVID-19, which is constantly adapting to its environment?
Yeah, this coronavirus, it's not as fast mutating as, say, the flu, but it does mutate over time. And the longer we let it linger, especially for many, many years, there will be vaccine escape to some degree. It won't be, right now, say Moderna and Pfizer are 95% efficacy. It won't be that it drops to zero, but it could drop significant percentages the more mutations it has. Now, we're doing lab studies right now to show how much our antibodies that we develop from this vaccine will attack this new variant. And some people say it probably won't affect much, at most a few percentage points drop. But the longer we let it roam free, the more it will pick up these resistance. And I use the word resistance because it's slightly, not exactly, but slightly akin to antibiotic resistance, right? You use more ways to attack it, especially certain drugs like monoclonal antibodies, which people speculate it could be use of monoclonal antibodies in an immunocompromised person. But the more you attack the virus, the more it will try ways to evade you. And the more time and more bodies in which it can live for a while to mutate, the greater the risk that this could happen. And that is what we ultimately don't want. Now, granted, we can modify the mRNA vaccines pretty quickly. We had this vaccine we are administering now back in February. We can synthesize pretty fast, but the trials will take so long and take so much effort and time, and we will lose a lot of cases, and we'll go through more of these openings, lockdowns that the pandemic is not controlled. We have to stop it now. And the vaccine thing, it's a more of a multi-year thing if it becomes a significant vaccine escape. But that should not be the consideration right now. Consideration right now is we have to stop it for a whole collective of public health, children's educational, and economic reasons. And long term, if we do not stop it in 2021, 2022, if we let it keep roaming, then the vaccine escape will really catch up with us in a few years. And that's what we ultimately definitely want to avoid as well.